Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Alka Halberg. I am part of the Cohesive Marketing team. I will be assisting the team today with the webinar as moderator. We will give it another 30 to 60 seconds to allow all the attendees to join us on this call. Great. I think we can start. Welcome to our next webinar in Cohesive's Maximo Back to Basics webinar series. Our aim for this webinar series is to highlight existing base Maximo functionality and features that your organization may not be using today to help you maximize your return on investment. We will be presenting this content in the Maximo application suite to give you an opportunity to see MAS and specifically the managed application. Our focus for this series will be on functional topics with plans to incorporate more technical topics in the future. Note that this webinar will be recorded and distributed post-webinar. All the attendees are currently set to listen-only mode, but feel free to post any questions or comments in the chat or question box. Should you have any technical questions or problems, please log it with the GoToWebinar technical team in the form of a question mark or help section on the panel itself. I will be handing you over to the host in a bit, but let me do a quick introduction of Cohesive first. Cohesive helps owner-operators embed digital ways of working that drive operational efficiency and enhance asset performance across all stages of the lifecycle. We at Cohesive draw on core tech solutions to support our clients. These solutions include Bentley's Infrastructure Cloud, iTwin, and IBM Maximo, for which Cohesive is the largest implementer. So, without further ado, let's dive in and hand you over to our host. Michael, over to you.
Thank you for the introduction, Elka. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you for joining me today. As a part of the Maximo Back to Basics series, I'll be presenting on an application that was introduced with Maximo 7.6, but is also available in the Maximo Application Suite 9.0 via the oil and gas industry solution. A little bit about me. I've been with Cohesive for nearly almost 4 years. Primarily a functional background with experience in project management, integrated quality assurance testing, and end user Maximo as well as mass training. I'm certified in Mass 9.0 as of a few months ago. And another area of specialization for me is the implementation of the IAM or Institute of Asset Management business practices. I've worked in a few different sectors, including energy and utilities, as well as mining and manufacturing. So without further ado, let's get on with the presentation. So the agenda for today's webinar will include an explanation as to what bypass management is and how it's intended to be used. We'll also discuss how MAS provides the framework for managing different types of bypass processes. We'll touch on some of the core functionality that will be enhanced by use of this application. And then we'll look at some of the benefits that your organization may obtain by using this application. And then I'll provide you with a few different use case scenarios that may be related to your organization. Then we will review a sample bypass process and move into a mass demonstration of one of the use case scenarios that we've discussed. Finally, we'll wrap with any questions that you may have during the presentation. So let's begin. So what is bypass management? It is one of the applications included in the oil and gas industry solution, which comes specifically either with the oil and gas industry solution or the HSE add-on, that's health, safety, and environment. The application has been designed to manage operations which deviate from standard operating practices, which can also be referred to as inhibits or overrides. They are typically associated with safety-related items or systems, such as a fire or gas detection systems, security systems, mechanical emergency shutdown systems, as well as alarm systems. Bypassing standard operations typically must comply with regulatory requirements, which can be required during shutdowns or other process transitions, which can be some of the most dangerous periods of operation. These scenarios are typically infrequent and occur over a short period of time and may not qualify or align with your management of change processes. They still do require clear documentation and supervision as they're managed under specific conditions. When you bypass your standard operating procedures, the timing of the process steps and the actual change are critical and may require their own safety system and process. The bypass management application supports integrity management by integrating your existing work management processes with your operation bypass process. So by incorporating this into MAS, it's going to help manage the cycle of work for those bypasses, such as identifying hazards associated, actions required during the bypass timeframe, as well as formal review and approvals. The application will also help assess the impact of the overall bypass, as well as analyze the potential risks involved to ensure both the safe execution and closeout of the bypass. So let's move on. So how does MAS provide the framework? As previously mentioned, the bypass management application integrates with functionality found in Core Manage. Some of the applications it integrates with include service requests, work order tracking, standard actions, and action tracking, just to name a few. You can create a bypass record from any one of those applications or create a record in one of these applications via bypass management. So the record will then be referenced under the related records tab, like you would see in the work order tracking application on an individual work order, for example. You can also leverage classifications to further define bypass questions or parameters, such as defining risk levels or required testing during the bypass as individual attributes that could be mapped to each bypass process. This application will also integrate with various oil and gas or HSE manager applications, such as operator logs, incidents, management of change, improvements, risk assessment, and investigations. For example, during routine operations, an operator log may be recorded and the need for bypassing standard operations could be identified in that operator log. From here, you could create a new bypass management record and build that related record relationship. As part of the bypass management process, you can define a formal review and approval, as well as have the ability to enforce that the process must be completed by someone who is deemed to be qualified or authorized to do so. You'll see this application uses similar statuses to what you've seen with work order tracking or elsewhere in Maximo, including waiting on approval, WAPPR, APPR approved, in progress, active, removed, completed, closed, canceled, waiting materials, and waiting scheduling. You can configure what statuses are available to align with your existing bypass business process. You may also define what statuses other than waiting approval that the record could be edited in. So for the purposes of our demo later, you'll see that I'll be editing the bypass record in status waiting approval, as the application's out-of-the-box functionality has not been configured to allow edits in any other status. Lastly, you can configure or leverage Maximo's workflow functionality to control the life cycle of the bypass record by routing it to the appropriate individuals for review and approval based on your defined business processes. All right, let's move on to some of the benefits of bypass management. So some of the benefits of implementing this process is increased control of your existing processes. If you do leverage Maximo's workflow capabilities, you can ensure that the workflow aligns with your process and that the required reviews and approvals are completed by the appropriate people in the order that it was designed to. You could also include escalations as part of this to enforce that those reviews or actions are completed in a timely manner, as well as use communications such as emails or work log records and system notifications throughout the record's lifecycle. Secondly, you can also increase efficiencies by utilizing your existing work management processes and tools. This includes allocating resources during bypass operations, utilizing bypass record templates, and applying existing service level agreements or SLAs, risk assessments, and standard actions. Lastly, you could also improve your analytics, auditing, and reporting by linking related records. such as your work orders, MOCs, incident records, or operator logs. So with that, let's take a look at a couple of different use cases. I've outlined a few that could be relevant to a few different organizations, and then documented those in the bypass management application so we can look at them later. Your organization may need to temporarily disable a fire detection system during routine maintenance. You could require the ability to deactivate a measurement alarm on your tank to perform some preventive maintenance. Or as a part of routine pigging, you could be required to disable the instrumentation tools that measure pressure or density while the pigging activities take place. You could need the bypass to bypass unstable operating conditions associated to a refrigeration system while repairs are completed. Or you could have a scenario where a pipe connection around a valve or another installed control mechanism that allows the passage of fluid through a pipeline is rerouted for all adjustments and repairs to take place. So with that in mind, let's take a look at a sample process diagram. So this is a sample process diagram that could be defined in Maximo Manage. This sample process has been broken into 4 different phases that you can see by the different colors shown here. The first phase is represented by the purple boxes. That's going to be the request phase. The next, which is represented by the blue box, is the review and approval phase. The green boxes identify the implementation phase, where the bypass is implemented and continuously monitored. And finally, the last phase with the yellow boxes is where the bypass is removed and the process is then formally completed and closed out. If you consider the use cases outlined in the previous slide, we can walk through this a little bit more clearly. So a need to bypass standard operations may be identified by a planner or operator, for example, which could then be validated by an operations supervisor. At this checkpoint, the operations supervisor may need to create an MOC if the bypass is not considered to be short-term. In the event that it is short-term, a hazard review should be conducted to identify all the potential hazards that may arise prior, during, and after the bypass has been initiated. You can also develop a checklist that is unique to the type of bypass requested to ensure that all required actions and tasks are identified and outlined on the bypass record. Your organization may require that those bypass requests over a certain risk level require approval from specific roles, such as the operations manager or a facilities manager, prior to implementing the bypass. And those bypass requests that have a lower risk may be reviewed and approved by other individuals in the organization. Once the request has been reviewed and approved, then the bypass can be implemented by an operator. The maintenance manager may be required to continuously monitor the bypass and confirm that it's still valid and required. And when the bypass is no longer needed, we can return to standard operations. Removing the bypass could then be requested and reviewed by the operations manager. In the event that a bypass should remain in place, then that's where we need an MOC record to be created to capture that change. And then we'd update the details of the bypass record accordingly. Otherwise, if it is approved to be removed and we're to return to standard operating conditions, then the operator can return back to standard operating conditions by completing the bypass record and closing it out, at which point it will become historical and read-only within Maximo. Okay, so with that, let's log into Mass and walk through one of the use case scenarios. Before we get started, I want to let you know that I will be, let me share my screen. Hang on, I think we're on the wrong slide here. 1 second. Okay. Before we get started, I want to let you know I'll be delivering this demo in a vanilla mass environment. We do use this environment for demos in some build configurations, but for the bypass management application, there hasn't been any configuration, there hasn't been any customization or workflow developed. So this demo not only has Core Maximo Manage 9.0, but it also include oil and gas, obviously, and Maximo Nuclear, Maximo Transportation, and Maximo Utilities. So you may see some applications, fields, and additional functionality that are included in one or more of these industry solutions. So with that, let's jump into Manage. So as with all other applications and processes in place in Maximo Manage, you can configure an existing operational dashboard or create a new operational dashboard table for bypass management records. I'm not going to be going into a whole lot of detail on the operational dashboards today, as they could be covered in a later demo. But these can also be set up as portlets in a Start Center application, same as with Maximo 7.6. The operational dashboard is simply provides a modernized look and feel with more dynamic design options available. You can move some of these portlets around and you have a little bit more flexibility on design. You can also navigate to the bypass management application from the go-to menu, of course, which is what I'll be doing. And it resides in the operations HSE module. You can see it here, bypass management, dot, dot, dot. So from the list view, you can create a new bypass record from the icon on the toolbar or from the sidebar navigation under the Common Actions section. For the purposes of today's demo, I have a record already created for us. So I will filter on those. And let's begin by reviewing the different pages on the bypass record. So the bypass tab is where you can capture the main details of the required bypass. There's plenty of fields available to capture information based on your existing process. As with other applications in Mass, you can remove and configure different fields to suit your business needs. But from this tab, you can provide a short description of the required bypass, identify the type of bypass, as well as categorize it. This is the header information, and it's going to be displayed on each page within this record. In the bypass details section, you can identify the location or the asset that is impacted and provide a reason for the bypass and document the scope of it accordingly. In this example, we'll have created a bypass record to disarm the existing fire alarm, the fire detection system while we perform some welding activities. And then once the welding activities have been completed, we will enable the fire detection system and return to normal operating conditions. There are additional details you can capture here, including the monitoring mechanism that you'll use, which is here. In this case, it's going to be manual, the safety critical elements, and authority type. You can flag this record if it will be a long-term bypass, as well as identify the frequency in which the bypass should be reviewed. And by long-term, that's going to be operationally specific, so that will need to be discussed within your own organization. In the dates section, you can update the target start and finish dates and the actual start and finish dates, as well as an estimated duration field, like you would see in the work order tracking application. Let's move over to the hazard review tab. So here you can identify a risk assessment value if you conduct your risk assessments in Manage. If you do complete these in Manage, the risk ranking value will carry over from the original risk assessment record. Some clients prefer to complete their risk assessment activities outside of Mass, but attach the supporting documentation where applicable. You still have this option. It's available via the bypass tab here. On view attachments, we can attach some right here. In the review actions section, let's open that up. You can identify actions that have been defined in the standard actions application that are applicable to the hazard review of the proposed bypass. In this example, we have a hazard assessment identified, and when I expand this, you can see who it's been assigned to or action to, whether or not it is repeatable, meaning to be used on this record more than once, and then each of the detailed components of the action. Let's move over to the checklist tab next. So the checklist tab will allow you to identify all the actions that are required before, during, and after the bypass has been implemented. Essentially, this becomes your list of everything that needs to be executed while you bypass standard operating procedures. You can assign each action to a single person or a group and enforce that completion sign-off is required, or flag the action to be repeatable within the record. So you can see here for the disabling of fire alarms, we start with a hazard assessment. We identify the reviewers, notify the maintenance manager, notify shift operators, notify operations manager, and then identify the approvers for this high-risk hazard assessment that this high-risk bypass management that we are trying to implement. And then we have the disable fire alarms and enable fire alarms, which have yet to be completed. So we'll come back to that. Over on the review and approve tab, you can identify who should be involved in the review process, as well as the final approval process. The review and approve tab in the bypass management applications functions just like the review and approve tab in the MOC application, if you're familiar with it. Out of the box, those individuals that are listed in this reviewers table cannot be listed in the approvers table and vice versa. Maximo views those similar actions and appropriately will prevent you from assigning duplicate work or effort. As previously mentioned, you could develop a workflow as well to enforce your business process rules during this phase. So for example, we could require a approval phase occurs only after everyone listed in the review table has completed their review of the bypass details. All right, let's move over to the specifications tab. So I haven't put much detail here, but you can leverage the specifications tab to define additional questions or parameters by classifying or applying attributes. For example, you may not choose to use the risk fields on the hazard tab and then require that you identify the risk ranking for a bypass here instead. Over on the related records tab, this is going to be really similar to what you would see in many other applications, including work order tracking. But this will display all records and manage that have been linked to this bypass record. So including work orders, MOCs, incidents, service requests, or operator log entries. We do have a related work order here as well as a related operator log, which identified this issue to begin with, which necessitates the bypass ultimately. You'll notice that the relationship field here will function similar to other applications in Manage. So you'll see this relationship either defined as an originator, follow-up, or related record. And over on the log tab, both the work log and the communications log are available here. It's here you can capture feedback and concerns, comments regarding the bypass activities under the work log sub-tab. Any emails sent through Manage, either manually or through the create communications function over on more actions here, right there, or system enforce emails are going to be referenced under this communication log automatically. And finally, we have the closure tab. It's here that you can record the details to support the removal and closure of the bypass operations. Your organization may require that the closure activities are reviewed and signed off by someone, or alternatively, that the process should be audited in the future. So those details could be filled out here in the closure comments and then enforce the audit required. and we'll talk about that functionality a little bit later. Let's jump back to the bypass tab. So this record, as you've already seen, has been entered by the user Julie Daniels. She's identified the location and asset that's going to be impacted, as well as documented the reason and scope of the bypass. On the hazard review tab, we can see she's also associated a risk assessment record, which can be seen here, risks associated to the welding activities that need to take place. She's identified a hazard assessment was required, and when I expand that review action here, you can see that Julie assigned the hazard assessment to Abby Rhodes. It was completed already, and we have a sign-off date and timestamp. On the checklist tab, Julie has also outlined the actions required, as we've seen, as well as identified who is responsible for completing each action. You can also determine an action by group if there's not one specific individual who should be assigned to this action. And you'll notice that there's some actions, as we mentioned before, that haven't been completed yet. Attaching supporting documentation isn't listed here, but that could be an option as well. Under the bypass tab, we can attach some supporting documentation. But the only two remaining are disabling the fire alarms and then re-enabling the fire alarms after the welding activities have taken place. Over on the review and approve tab, we have the list of reviewers outlined, as well as those who have been identified as an approver of the bypass procedure. You will notice that in the approver table, Chris Wilson, who I am logged in as, is responsible for reviewing the bypass record and approving it. So I can do that right now by checking the approved checkbox here, and that will update the date field with a date and timestamp as well. Going to save that record. Now, like I mentioned before, this record's only editable because it's out of the box in the waiting approval status, but that could be changed. For the purposes of the demo, I'm not going to be changing the status until we get to status complete. But if I approve this, I could change it to status approved. And then if your organization would like it set up in such a way that you would allow edits in status approved, you could then utilize the checklist to continue the completion of that bypass record, and then change it to read only in a different status, maybe once you've reached complete or closed. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and log out, and I'll log in as Julie Daniels. Okay, and I will navigate back to our bypass management record so I can implement the bypass procedure. So over on the checklist tab, I can update the action item 1016 to disable fire alarms to indicate that I have disabled the alarms and the bypass is now in progress. For the sake of the demo, I am pretending that myself, Michael, is going to be the operator who disabled the alarms. So we'll say the action was by me, and then that I can go ahead as Julie and mark this as complete. Depending on your operations or your procedures at your organization, you may require that someone other than the operator is completing this checklist, which is why I'm doing it this way. Or it could be that the operator is doing it themselves. It's just down to your requirements. So I'm going to go ahead and save that we have disabled the fire alarms and that the bypass is now in progress. Again, I could change the status here if it was still editable to in progress to signify that the bypass is moving along. Once the welding activities have been completed, then Julie can update the action 1017 to re-enable the fire alarms, indicating that Michael, our operator, has enabled the fire alarms, the bypass is now complete, and we can revert back to our standard operating procedures. Julie may have received supporting documentation as well that could have come out of the bypass procedure. And then she can attach that again from the main bypass tab using the view and add from library, wherever you need to add them from to add a new attachment. And once that is done, we can update the status of the record to reflect this by the change status icon. Let me make sure I mark this as complete first and save. And then we can update our status to complete, indicating that the bypass procedure has now been completed. We've done the necessary welding activities and re-enabled the fire alarms. Your organization may require that someone other than the person who created this record, in this case, Julie Daniels, has to review it prior to closure. So in such a case, let's act that way. We'll log in as Chris Wilson to complete the final review and then close the record. So log in here as Chris Wilson. Again, this is up to your organization to determine what those roles and responsibilities are. I'm going to pop over back to the operations HSE module, back to bypass management, filter and search for our record. Status is complete. I'm going to pop over to the closure tab here. So here I can record the closure details as we mentioned before. This could be lessons learned during the bypass procedure, what went well and what didn't, where there's room for improvement, any information that could be required by your organization as part of your bypass management review process. Finally, Chris will sign off that he reviewed the record, and I could flag this to require an audit in the future, which is a feature that integrates with the audits and surveys application over in the safety and quality management HSE module right here. So let's enter some closure details, lessons learned, what went well, and we will say the closure was reviewed by myself, Chris Wilson, and we will flag that an audit is required and then save. And finally, we can close out the bypass. You can use the change status functionality or the pre-configured change status functionalities here. And we will change the status to closed. Hit OK. And from there, the record will become historic and read only. If I go back to the list view, we can see that that will disappear from our list, record 1830. And we'd have to filter on all records to be able to find it again. With that, that concludes the demonstration of the bypass management application in mass. So I'll turn things back over to Elka before we open up the phone lines for the Q&A period. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Michael, for that very informative session. We do have some time for questions, and we have two. So the first one is, if the action is completed, will the responsible be notified?
That's a good question. It could be configured in that way. Right now in out-of-the-box Maximo, I don't believe so, but I may need to get back to you on that one.
Great. And then we have another one. Is this functionality available on the mobile app?
I need to double back and get back with you on that. I think that it is, but let me get back to you on that one.
Okay. And then what's the difference between MOC and bypass management?
So we talked about this a little bit in the presentation, but management of change is going to be a permanent change to your operating procedures, where bypass management is a temporary one. So really, it depends on what your organization needs and what is required to address the process you're trying to change.
Okay. And then can you use templates?
Uh, so you can't use templates in this application. Let me open that back up. Um, but we could duplicate a record. So there aren't templates available, but we could duplicate certain bypasses and then create a sort of a template off of that. So we don't have templates like you would have in the desktop requisitions application, but we do have some functionality that would more or less imitate that.
Okay. And then can the bypass management record be linked from the work order record?
Yes, it can. Yeah, it could be linked from the work order record, or it could be linked from the bypass management record itself.
And have you configured it to work with SMAS Mobile for any of your customers?
I haven't personally, but I will check and get back to you to see if we have anyone that has done that. Um, yeah, let me get back to you on that one.
And can it be exported to Excel directly from the application?
That's a good question. I haven't tried that myself. Um, let's see what we're able to do here. I may want to get back to you on that one as well. There's probably, yeah, we could run a report and export that to Excel, but there aren't any out of the box reports available. I'm trying to see if we could, yeah, I don't see that option. There may be a way, and I'm not seeing it in front of me right now. So let me get back to you on that one.
Okay, looks like that's all. Um, So with that, we can conclude our webinar. I want to thank you, Michael, for joining us today, as well as your attendees for being here. With that, if you want to reach out to any of the presenters or the team at Cohesive via our website or via LinkedIn, note we have the previous webinars available on YouTube. The recording of this webinar will also be made available to you on our channel. So that is a wrap for today's webinar, but please register and join us for our upcoming webinar on March 20th with the topic warranties. Michael, thank you again, and I wish everyone a great day.
Thank you, everyone.